Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The distress signal had been sitting in the queue for 6 hours and 14 minutes when Dara Nolan walked into the relay room and saw it still blinking, unanswered, like a wound nobody wanted to touch. She stood there for a moment, just reading it. The colony on Ketheri 4 had sent the signal themselves, which meant their automated emergency systems were already gone. The Vale Collective had 41 warships in orbit above them. No food was getting through. No medicine. The Vori Elders, 3 of the oldest living beings in the known galaxy, were among those trapped below. Dara pulled up the response log. The Thalvari High Command had reviewed it at Hour 1. Their note read, Political sensitivity, awaiting Council directive. The Grenthi Dominion reviewed it at Hour 2. Their note read, Outside operational patrol boundary. Regret unable to assist. The Sarati Collective reviewed it at Hour 3. Their note read, Mobilization timeline estimated at 18 to 21 standard days. The Syndicate of Free Worlds reviewed it at Hour 5. Their note read, Motion tabled pending further deliberation. Dara read all of it. Then she closed the log, walked down the corridor to the main briefing room, and pushed the door open without knocking. Commander Sovu was at the head of the table. He was tall, feathered along his neck and shoulders, with sharp yellow eyes that looked at her the way most Thalvari looked at humans, like they were waiting for her to do something embarrassing. Point 6 other senior officers sat around him, all different species, all looking tired. Dara said, The Ketheri signal. I want to respond. Nobody spoke for a moment. Sovu tilted his head. You are a field coordinator, not a fleet commander. I have authority over the human ships docked at this station. The INS Resolute and the INS Far Shore. Both are fueled and crewed. One of the other officers, a Grenthi with gray scaled arms, let out a low sound that was not quite a laugh. 2 ships, against 41. 3 days, Dara said. That is all the colony needs. Elder Osha said, 3 days. If we can hold the blockade line for 3 days, their ground systems will be back online, and the Vale lose their reason to stay. Sovu folded his long fingers together on the table. The Galactic Council has not issued a mandate. I know. You have no allied support. I know. You have 43 crew members between both ships. I know that too. The room was very quiet. Sova looked at her for a long time, and there was something in his eyes that was not mockery anymore. It was something closer to unease, the kind of person feels when they are watching someone walk toward something they themselves would not walk toward it. He said, I cannot authorize this. Dara nodded once. I'm not asking you to. She left the room. Technician Redo was waiting in the corridor outside, his 4 upper limbs folded nervously against his chest, his compound eyes wide. He was the smallest person on the station and usually the quietest. He had clearly been listening through the door. Are you going? He asked. Yes, she said. They will not help you. I know. He was quiet for a second. Then, will you come back? Dara looked at him. She did not lie to him. She said, I plan to. She walked to the docking bay. Captain Rail Sandra was already there, leaning against the outer hull of the Resolute with her arms crossed, like she had been expecting this. Rail was not the type to be surprised by much. She had short, gray-streaked hair and the kind of face that had spent a lot of years deciding things quickly. Heard the briefing room has thin walls, Rail said. Apparently, Dara said. 41 warships. Yes. Rail was quiet for a moment, looking at the ship behind her. Then she said, Bex is already running calculations in the weapons bay. She started about 20 minutes ago. Dara blinked. How did she know? She said the signal had been in queue for 6 hours. She figured someone was going to do something stupid eventually and wanted to be ready. Rail pushed off the hull. Crew is being briefed now. Nobody has walked out yet. Dara exhaled slowly. Something in her chest that had been very tight began to loosen, just slightly. They boarded together. The Resolute undocked 11 minutes later, the Far Shore following close behind. No ceremony. No announcement over the station channels. Just 2 ships turning toward the dark and moving. Back in the relay room, Technician Redo sat at his station and did not close the sensor feed. He watched the 2 small signals moving away from the station, getting smaller, Heading toward Ketheri, he heard Commander Sovu enter the room quietly behind him. Sovu did not speak. He stood and looked at the same feed. After a long time, Redo said softly, "Do you think they will make it?" Sovu did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower than usual. "I think," he said, "that I have never seen anything like this before." He pulled up a chair. He sat down. He watched. The moment the Resolute dropped out of FTL above Ketheri 4, every screen on the bridge lit up at once. Rail did not flinch. She stood at the center of the bridge and read the numbers quietly in her head. 41 Veil warships, most of them mid-class destroyers, heavier than anything the two human ships were carrying. They were arranged in a loose shell formation around the planet, close enough to the surface that nothing could leave the atmosphere without being seen. Below, the colony was dark. No orbital beacon. No traffic signals. Nothing moving. Just a quiet world being slowly squeezed. The comm opened without warning. The voice on the other end was deep and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never once been in a situation they did not control. 2 ships. Interesting. A pause. Human registry. Even more interesting. Rail did not respond yet. She nodded to her comm officer, who opened a secondary channel down to the colony surface. That a voice came back, old and slow and rough at the edges, like it was being pulled up from very deep water. "Elder Osha, you came." "We came," Rail said. "How long do your people need?" 3 days. "Our emergency systems will be restored in 3 days if the blockade is broken." "Copy that." Rail closed the surface channel and opened the one to the Veil Commander. "This is Captain Rail Sandra of the INS Resolute. The colony on Ketheri 4 is a protected civilian settlement under Galactic Code, Article 9. You are in violation. We are asking you to withdraw." A long pause. Then the voice came back, and it was almost amused. "You are asking me?" "Yes." "With 2 ships?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "You have 1 hour to leave this system before I stop being entertained." The channel closed. Rail turned to Bex Haruna, who was already bent over her console, pulling up the asteroid field charts for the outer belt. Bex had the focused quiet of someone doing 10 things at once and keeping track of all of them. She did not look up when she spoke. "They are not going to charge us right away," Bex said. "They think this is a gesture. They think we are here to file a formal protest and then leave. We have maybe 6 hours before they decide we are serious." "Then we use 6 hours," Rail said. Bex finally looked up. There was something sharp and a little dangerous in her expression, the look she always got when a problem was hard enough to be interesting. "I have an idea. It is not safe." "Tell me." Bex walked them through it over the next 20 minutes. The asteroid belt running along the outer edge of the Ketheri system had a dense cluster on the far side. If the Resolute moved into it slowly, the debris scatter would create sensor ghosts on Veil screens, making the one ship look like 3 or 4, depending on how the readings bounced. The far shore, meanwhile, could run a relay loop using the Veil's own communication frequency to create the impression of an incoming fleet signal from the inner relay stations. IT would not fool a careful observer for long. But the Veil were not expecting a trick. They were expecting surrender. "And the supply drops?" Dara asked. She had been standing at the back of the bridge, listening. Bex pulled up a second diagram. "The Veil formation has a gap on the southern approach. It is not a clean gap, but if we use small, unpiloted pods and launch them at irregular angles, we can slip medical supplies and food through. Slow, inefficient, but enough." Dara looked at the gap on the screen. It was not much. It was barely anything. But barely anything was more than nothing. "Do it," Rail said. They worked through the first day without stopping. The Resolute moved into the asteroid belt and let the debris do what Bex said it would do. The Veil formation shifted twice, try to get a clear reading. The far shore broadcast the false fleet signals on rotating frequencies, careful to keep the pattern just irregular enough to seem real. .12 supply pods went down to the surface through the southern gap. 7 made it. 5 were intercepted, but 7 made it. And when Elder Osha confirmed receipt over the comm, the entire bridge let out a breath that had been held for hours. The Veil Commander opened his channel again at hour 8. He was no longer amused. I see what you're doing, he said. It will not last. Rail said, it does not need to last forever. Just long enough. Long enough for what? Your council has not moved. No fleet is coming. You are alone. Rail did not answer that. She closed the channel. She did not answer it because she did not have a good answer. He was right. No orders had come from the Galactic Council. No fleet was responding. Back at Outpost Varen, Commander Sova was watching their sensor signals on a feed and had not moved from his chair in 9 hours. But Rail had a crew of 43 who had not slept and had not complained, and a weapons officer who was already planning the next feint before the first one had finished, and a field coordinator standing at the back of the bridge with her eyes on the surface of a planet where old beings were still breathing. That was not nothing. Rail looked at her crew, then at the screen full of enemy ships, then at the small dot of the planet below. What is next? She asked Bex. Bex was already writing it out. Phase 2, she said. It is less safe than Phase 1. Of course it is, Rail said. Walk me through it. By the middle of the second day, the crew of the Resolute had not slept. They had rotated in short shifts, 2 hours at a time, but nobody actually slept during theirs. They lay down, stared at the ceiling, and got back up when their time was done. The ship smelled like recycled air and cold food eaten at stations. People moved through the corridors with the quiet economy of those who have cut out everything that is not necessary. Bex had not left the weapons bay except once, to use the bathroom and get water, and she had taken the water back with her. Her console was covered in calculations, some crossed out, some circled, most of them written and rewritten until they made sense. 3 times in the past 18 hours, a Veil destroyer had moved close enough that the ship should have retreated by any rational measure. 3 times, Bex had found an angle that made retreating unnecessary. The far shore had taken a hit at hour 30. Not a direct weapon strike, but a proximity detonation from a Veil warning shot that was less of a warning and more of a message. One corridor section lost pressure. The crew sealed it manually, which took 40 minutes and left 2 people with burns on their hands, and then they went back to their stations. Dara heard about it over the crew channel and felt something cold pass through her. But when she checked in with the far shore, the voice that answered was steady. We are fine, the officer said, still running the frequency loop. The Veil bought it again. Dara exhaled. Good. Keep going. She went back to coordinating the supply drops. It was slow and frustrating work. For every 3 pods she launched through the Southern Gap, 1 got through cleanly, 1 got intercepted, and 1 landed somewhere on the surface that required the colonists to go and find it on foot. But the colonists did find them. Every time, Elder Osha confirmed each one personally over the comm in her slow, heavy voice, and each confirmation felt like a small candle being lit in a dark room. At T-hour 36, Elder Osha asked Dara a question. Why did you come? Dara was pulling up trajectory calculations when it was asked, and the simplicity of the question stopped her hands. She sat for a moment. That is a big question, she said. I have time, Elder Osha said. At my age, everything is slow, even a siege. Dara thought about it honestly. She thought about the 6 hours the signal had sat unanswered. She thought about the briefing room and the neat, careful notes in the response log. Every species finding their own clean way to say no. I think, she said slowly, that humans have a hard time watching something die when there is still a chance it does not have to. The calm was quiet for a moment. Then Elder Osha said, Your species was described to us as young, reckless, prone to emotion over reason. That is probably accurate, Dara said. They did not mention, Elder Osha said, that you were also terrifying. Dara did not know what to say to that. So she said nothing. And somehow the silence felt like the right answer on the bridge. Rail was looking at the latest sensor sweep when Bex appeared in the doorway. Bex had dark circles under her eyes and dried food on her sleeve, and she looked like someone who had been in a quiet war for 2 days, which she had. Drosk is changing formation, Bex said. He is pulling his outer ships inward. He is done playing. Rail looked at the screen. The Veil shell around the planet was tightening. The gaps they had been using for supply drops were narrowing. The false signals from the far shore had slowed the process, but not stopped it. How long before the southern gap closes? Rail asked. 4 hours. Maybe 5. How many pods can we get through in 4 hours? Bex thought. 14. If we push the launch interval. Push it, Rail said. They pushed it. The next 4 hours were the hardest of the operation. The Veil were actively watching the southern approach now, and 2 of the 14 pods were intercepted within minutes of launch. But 12 got through. 12 more packages of medicine and compressed food landed on the surface of Kethri 4, and the colonists moved to collect them even as the Veil ships overhead grew closer. At T-hour 41, the gap closed, and more supply drops were possible. Dara stood at her console and looked at the numbers. The colony had enough to last through day 3 if they were careful. It was not comfortable. It was not safe. But it was possible, she told Elder Osha. The old Vori was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We will be careful." Back at Outpost Varen, word had spread. The human standoff at Kethri was being picked up on monitoring feeds across 6 relay stations. The Galactic Council had been in an emergency session for 11 hours. Counselors argued about jurisdiction, authority, precedent. One counselor, a Sarati named Bryn, had stopped arguing and was simply watching the sensor feed from Kethri on a private screen beside her seat. She watched 2 small ship signals holding a line against 41. She did not speak for a long time. Then she sent a private message to the Sarati Fleet Admiral. The message was 3 words. How fast? Departure. The Admiral responded in under a minute. T outpost Varen. Commander Sova had finally eaten the food Redo brought him, though he did not remember eating it. He was watching the feed. He would keep watching. Dawn on day 3 was 6 hours away. Drosk was no longer sending messages. He had stopped talking entirely, which Beck said was the most dangerous sign yet. Rail called the crew to general alert and told them to rest while they could. Nobody slept. 6 minutes before dawn on the 3rd day, every Veil ship moved at once. There was no warning transmission. No final ultimatum. Drosk had decided that words were finished. All 41 warships broke from their shell formation and turned toward the 2 human ships in a coordinated sweep, like a hand closing into a fist on the Resolute. Every alarm went off at the same time. Bex looked at her screen for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "There are no more tricks." Rail heard her. She opened the ship-wide channel and did not dress it up. She said, "All hands. Full combat readiness. Hold the line." That was all. The crew did not panic. They moved to their stations with the kind of focus that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having already decided, somewhere in the past 2 days of no sleep and burning hands and recycled air, that they were not leaving. The far shore swung wide to cover the Resolute's flank, which was the plan they had agreed on if it ever came to a direct engagement. 2 small ships against 41 was not a battle in any traditional sense. But there was something else they could do. They could make it expensive. They could make it slow. They could make Dross pay for every meter he advanced. And they did. The first wave of Veil destroyers came in hard, and the Resolute met them with everything Bex had loaded into the launch tubes, which was considerable because Bex had spent the last 6 hours preparing for exactly this while everyone else was trying to rest. The forward Veil ship took 2 direct hits and pulled back. A second ship lost its navigational array and began drifting. The far shore hit a third along its engine housing, and the explosion lit up the dark on every screen across the system. But there were 41 of them. The Resolute took a strike to its port side at the 4-minute mark. The ship shook so hard that 2 crew members fell from their stations. A section of hull plating buckled. The damage control team was moving before Rail finished calling for them. The far shore took 2 hits in quick succession. Their weapons array went offline for 90 seconds, the longest 90 seconds in the memory of everyone on board, and then Bex's counterpart on that ship brought it back manually and kept firing 0.7 minutes in. Drosk opened a channel. His voice was not amused anymore, and it was not cold. It was the voice of someone ending something. "This is finished," he said. Rail was watching 3 different screens and had blood on her sleeve from a crew member she had helped off the floor 30 seconds ago. She did not look away from the screens when she answered. "Not yet," she said. Dross closed the channel. The Veil formation began its final compression, and then something happened on Rail's long-range sensor screen, a FTL signature. She almost missed it in the noise of the battle. But it was there at the edge of the system. 1 ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel. then another, then 4 more at once. Rael stared at the screen. Beck stared at it. The bridge went very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then more signatures. 7 ships. Then 12. Then a cluster of 20 that came out of FTL, so close together their drive signatures overlapped on the sensor display. Falvery Registry. Serati colors. 2 ships bearing Grinthi Dominion markings. Even 2 smaller vessels from the Syndicate of Free Worlds, which had tabled their motion less than 48 hours ago. None of them had coordinated together. There had been no joint fleet order. They had each simply come, separately, for their own reasons. The combined fleet that assembled in Ketheri space in the next 4 minutes numbered 231 ships that Drosk's channel opened again. He said nothing for a long moment. Rael could hear the activity behind his voice, his own crew reacting, recalculating, understanding he spoke one sentence. It was not a threat. It was not an argument. It was the sound of a decision being accepted. We are withdrawing. The Veil collective formation broke apart and moved away from the planet in tight groups, accelerating toward the system edge. In under 10 minutes, they were gone. The space around Ketheri 4 went quiet on the surface of the planet. The silence was broken by sound. The Vori elders had begun to sing. It was an old sound, layered and slow, the kind of sound that did not need a translator because it was not carrying words. It was carrying something older than words. The crew of the Resolute heard it through the open comm channel, faint but clear, rising from the surface like heat. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a while. A T outpost, Varen. Commander Sova was standing. He did not remember standing up. He was just on his feet, looking at the sensor feed, and the feed showed 2 small damaged human ships at the center of a gathering fleet, and a planet below them that was still alive. He sat back down slowly. He closed his eyes. He breathed. Technician Redo, beside him, made a very small sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind that escapes when something has been held too tight for too long and finally releases on Meridian Prime. Grand Arbiter Vane turned off his private feed and sat in the dark of his archive room for a long time. Then he called his aide and said he needed to make a statement. His aide reminded him that he had not made a public statement in 11 years. I know, Vane said. That is why this one matters. The ships landed in shifts. The colony on Ketheri 4 had 1 working landing platform and 2 open fields that were flat enough to be used in an emergency, which this still qualified as. The Resolute came down first, then the far shore, its hull marked in 3 places with a deep scoring of weapons contact. 1 section still showing the manual patch the crew had applied at hour 30. The colonists who came to meet them were thin. Not dangerously so, not yet, but the kind of thin that comes from 2 weeks of careful rationing, where every meal is a calculation. They stood in the gray morning light of Ketheri 4 and watched the humans come down the boarding ramp. And for a moment, nobody moved on either side. Then a child ran forward. Small, Bryn species with 4 little arms and wide compound eyes, and she ran straight to the nearest human crew member and pressed her face against his arm and held on. After that, everyone moved. The next 6 hours were loud and practical and exhausting. The human crew unloaded every medical supply on both ships. They helped set up the field treatment stations. They carried things and lifted things and translated things through their comm systems when language became a barrier, which it frequently did. 2 crew members with medical training worked without stopping through the entire morning. Nobody asked them to do any of it. They just did it. Dara found Elder Osha in a small stone shelter near the center of the colony, seated on a low platform surrounded by 3 other Vori elders who were even more still and ancient-looking than she had imagined from the voice on the comm. The room smelled like dry grass and something faintly sweet that had no name in any human language. Elder Osha was smaller than Dara expected, barely taller than Child. Her skin was the color and texture of old bark, dark and layered, and her eyes, when she opened them and looked at Dara, were the pale silver of something that had been looking at the universe for 300 years and had decided to stop being surprised by it. She raised both her hands and placed them against Dara's face. Her palms were very warm. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet enough that Dara had to lean in to hear it. I have lived 300 years, she said. I have met many peoples, walked through many wars, watched many signals go unanswered. She paused. None of them came when it had been 6 hours, and they had no orders and no reason except that they could not leave. Dara did not know what to say. She felt something pressing at the back of her eyes that she held back with the particular effort humans use when they have decided this is not the moment. I will remember your kind, Elder Osha said, until my last breath, and I will tell the stars about you after that. The words went out over the colony channel without anyone meaning to broadcast them. Someone had left the comm open. By the time Dara walked back to the landing platform, the words were already traveling across relay stations. By evening, they were everywhere. The Galactic Council on Meridian Prime. A session that had been arguing about jurisdiction for 2 days came to an abrupt quiet when a junior aide walked in and read Elder Osha's words aloud from a datapad. The chamber stayed quiet for almost a full minute, which was longer than it had been quiet at any point in living memory. Then Grand Arbiter Vane's statement was distributed to every council member simultaneously. It was not long. He had not written it to be long. He wrote it to be true that he wrote that he had served the council for 5 decades. He had seen great battles, great speeches, great moments that changed the shape of the galaxy. He wrote that 2 damaged ships with 43 exhausted crew holding a blockade line alone, with no mandate and no backup and no guarantee of anything, might be the most important thing he had ever seen. Not because they won, because they did not leave. The statement was read in council halls and ship canteens and small colony shelters across a dozen systems. Back at Outpost Varen, Commander Sova received a private comm from Dara. He took it in his personal quarters, sitting upright at his desk, hands folded, as if this were a formal meeting. Old habits, he asked her one question. He had been thinking about it since he sat down to watch the feed 2 days ago. He asked, "Were you afraid?" Dara's voice came back after a short pause, and he heard a laugh in it first. A real one, not polished or diplomatic. Then she said the whole time, every second of it. Sova was quiet. Then he said, and he meant it fully, which was not something he said things fully very often. That makes it more remarkable, not less. Dara said, "Tell that to Bex. She will argue with you." "I believe it," he said. And he did. That evening, the Vori elders sang again. It carried across the open comm channels and through the hulls of the ships still in orbit and into the ears of people who had no shared language with the Vori and did not need one. On the surface, a colony that had been dark for 2 weeks turned its lights back on. Ketheri 4 at night, seen from orbit, looked like a handful of embers someone had scattered carefully in the dark. Rail, watching from the bridge of the Resolute, thought it was the best thing she had seen in years. The journey back to Outpost Varen took longer than the journey out. Both ships were running on reduced power. The damage from the engagement managed, but not repaired, held together with manual patches and careful navigation. The crew could have pushed harder. Nobody suggested it. There was an unspoken agreement that the ships had earned the right to move slowly for a while. Rail spent most of the return journey doing something she had not done in 3 days, sitting still. She had a small observation window near the back of the bridge, barely larger than a porthole, and she sat beside it and watched the stars move past without urgency. The sound of the ship around her was normal. Engine hum, ventilation, the quiet voices of crew members doing routine checks. Normal had never sounded so good. She was still sitting there when Dara came and leaned against the wall beside her. Neither of them said anything for a while. That was the thing about people who had been through something together. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything that had already been said and done and did not need repeating. Eventually, Rail asked, "Do you think anyone will remember this in 100 years?" Dara thought about Elder Osha's hands on her face, warm and steady. She thought about the words the old Vori had said, the ones that had traveled across relay stations before Dara had even made it back to the landing platform. "I think," she said, "the Vori will remember it for at least 300. Rail smiled. It was small and tired and completely real. She looked back out the window. When the Resolute docked at Outpost Varen, there was no announcement. No ceremony had been arranged. Nobody had organized anything, but the docking bay was full. Every species stationed at the outpost was there. Cavalry officers in their formal coverings, Grinthi technicians still in their work gear, a cluster of Sarati crew members who had come off shift early without explanation. Even several beings Dara did not recognize, from a small delegation passing through on other business entirely, who had simply heard and decided to stay. They did not cheer. There was no noise at all when the ramp lowered and the crew began to come down. The gathered crowd simply stood and watched, and the watching itself was the thing. It was the kind of attention that cannot be faked, the kind that comes when something has moved through you and changed the position of something you did not know could be moved. Dara came down the ramp and walked through the bay. Technician Reto was standing near the edge of the crowd. He was so small that she almost missed him. When she passed, he raised all four of his upper limbs and extended them fully, straight out from his body, held perfectly still. She would learn later from Sovu what it meant. The Bryn used it rarely. It was a gesture reserved for things that could not be repaid. She did not know that when she passed him. She just saw his face, the wide compound eyes, and the held stillness of someone feeling something very large in a very small body, and she nodded to him. He lowered his limbs and looked like the breath had gone out of him entirely, in a good way. Commander Sovu found her later, in the corridor near the relay room where this had all started. He did not make it a formal meeting. He just walked beside her for a while, which was unusual for him, and then he said, I reviewed the signal log again. From the beginning. 6 hours and 14 minutes. Yes, Doris said. I was in that briefing room, he said. I signed a response note. Mine said, awaiting further council guidance. Doris said nothing. I wanted you to know, he said, that I have crossed that note out. In the official record, it still shows what was written, but I crossed it out. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the corridor ahead. That means something, she said. It should have meant more 3 days ago, he said. They walked the rest of the corridor in silence that on Meridian Prime, Grand Arbiter Vane was alone in his archive room, recording a private log entry. He had made public statements. He had answered questions from 7 different council bodies and given 2 formal addresses in the past 24 hours. But this one was private, for himself. For the record, he kept that no one else would read. He spoke slowly, as he always did when he was saying something he wanted to get exactly right, that he said that in his years of service, he had developed a way of measuring events, not by their size or their noise, but by how long they stayed with him after they were over. Most things passed. Even large things eventually passed through him and left without a mark. This had not passed. He said that 43 humans with no orders in 2 damaged ships had held a line for 2 days, not because they were commanded to, not because they had calculated a winning chance, but because a signal had sat unanswered and they could not walk past it. He stopped the recording for a long time. When he continued, his voice was quieter. He said, there is an old phrase used across many cultures and many languages, used when something happens that is beyond ordinary response. When something is so complete, so outside of what was expected, that even those with power and wisdom and long memory can only fall still, he said. Even the gods watched in silence, he said. I used to think that was a poetic expression. I used to think it was a way of making small things sound larger than they were, he said. I do not think that anymore. But he ended the recording. Across the galaxy, in the days that followed, the phrase traveled. Not shouted, not announced. It moved quietly, the way true things move, passed between people who had seen the feed or heard the signal or read Vane's statement, and felt something shift inside them that they could not fully name. Leave it to us, 3 words. Said by a tired woman in a corridor outside a briefing room. To a commander who had already said no 3 words that 2 ships had made good on Kethari 4. The Vori elders were still singing. Elder Osha, seated in her stone shelter with the warm light of morning coming through the low window, sang softly to herself and thought about a human woman who had placed her forehead briefly against Elder Osha's hands before pulling away, and about the sound the stars made when they were listening. She knew that sound. She had heard it only a few times in 300 years that IT was rare, that sound. But it was real, and it meant something has happened here that will not be forgotten.